For centuries, the world we live in has been plagued and fueled with ideals of avariciousness and the greed for power. It's a world that's run by the power to contaminate others. Can one man have the power to challenge these ideals? This man amended and brought together a whole nation in the aspiration of proving how independent and powerful the people can be against a dominant empire that overrules the rights of the individuals who didn't have a voice. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was precisely the man that gave a voice to the unheard shadows. He was a leader who left a legacy by exposing the British Empire's inequitable laws and discriminatory actions. From 1893 to 1948, he led the Indian people in South Africa and India to freedom by using his exceptional method of nonviolence. Gandhi was born in a period where Hindus faced many challenges. One of these challenges was the Indian Hindus' segregated caste system. This caste system was separated into four groups: the Brahmins or priests, Kshatriyas or soldiers, Vaishyas or merchants, and Shudras or workers. Below these four castes were the untouchables. The untouchable caste was considered the most miserable and undesirable of all the castes. Due to the judgmental and discretionary basis of this caste system, the untouchables experienced ongoing maltreatment from society and were unable to pick their desired occupation. This was the social issue that Gandhi engaged in when he began his battle for human rights several years later. Belonging to the Vaishyas caste group, Gandhi began exploring theology in 1888 while pursuing a degree in law. His studies helped him gain a broader appreciation for cultural diversity. After the completion of his law degree in London, Gandhi returned to India, where he was offered an employment opportunity in South Africa in 1893. While in South Africa, Gandhi experienced firsthand the oppressive and discriminatory behaviors of the British. In 1883, while riding a train to Pretoria, South Africa, Gandhi was unjustly expelled off the train as a result of his nationality. In his autobiography, he wrote, "The hardship to which I was subjected was superficial, only a symptom of deep disease of color prejudice. I should try, if possible, to root out the disease and suffer hardships in the process." This humiliation motivated Gandhi. Thus, in 1894, he flourished as a political leader and organizer in South Africa. At this time, Gandhi founded the Natal Indian Congress, which focused on upholding all laws to the same rights of all citizens under the British Empire. While educating people about the social injustices, the British government began proposing many laws and bills that directly affected Indians. For example, the Ascetic Registration Bill required all Indians and Asians to be fingerprinted and carry a registration certificate at all times. Gandhi called this a Black Act, as he felt it would only lead to more discrimination, the absolute ruin for all Indians in South Africa. Another proposed law was the 1885 Immigration Law Amendment Bill, which stated Indians had to return to India at the end of their 5-year indenture period, or they would have to be re-indentured for 2 more years. Refusing would result in an annual tax of £3. In order to influence change, Gandhi introduced his followers to Satyagraha in 1907. Satyagraha was the idea of civil resistance. He believed forming mass protests against British laws, policies, and social injustices would be the most effective principle for social action, justice, freedom, and personal dignity. Gandhi encouraged his followers to use Satyagraha, the truth force or soul force, in their protests against any future injustice, since he believed violence degraded and corrupted the mind. Gandhi's efforts were worthwhile as the government passed the Indian Relief Act in 1914, which ceased the special taxation, the Ascetic Registration Bill, and all resistors were pardoned. These accomplishments proved to be stepping stones in Gandhi's leadership and legacy. Subsequently, Gandhi decided to return to India as he felt his work in South Africa had been completed. In 1915, India received Gandhi with open arms, recognizing him as a leader. Gandhi became known as Mahatma, meaning great soul, but his work was not complete. Gandhi assisted indigents, including the untouchables, founding the Satyagraha Ashram homes. These homes were religious-oriented communal farms created to reflect the philosophy of Swaraj or self-reliance. All participants, including the untouchables, performed the same tasks with the purpose of creating equality and unity among the people. In the meantime, in 1919, the Railroad Act was instituted, permitting the government to imprison anyone without trial or conviction. Thousands of people gathered peacefully to protest and arm-start Punjab. The British murdered 370 Indians and injured approximately 1,200, including women and children. This massacre became known as the tragedy of Armstar. Gandhi's response was, "I had faith in them until 1919, but the Armstar massacre changed my heart." In 1920, this tragedy catalyzed a movement against the British rule and constructed the path for Gandhi's non-cooperation movement from 1920 to 1922. The non-cooperative movements were a series of non-violent resistance and civil disobedience protests that aimed at organizing boycotts of British goods with the intent of placing economic pressure on the British. During a protest in 1922, 22 Indian officers were massacred in Chari Chara, United Provinces by a crowd of protesters. Consequently, Gandhi seized all non-cooperative movements since he believed they had lost their significance. As a result, Gandhi was sentenced to 6 years in prison due to the odious event. Although the non-cooperation movement stopped, other conflicts began in India in the 1920s. When Gandhi was liberated, he witnessed an increase in violence and hatred toward the Muslims and Hindus. Gandhi strongly believed that the future of India would require the unition of the Muslims and Hindus. In response, Gandhi began a fast to persuade the community to cease the violent actions. His influential leadership allowed these two religious groups to reconcile for the time being. In 1925, he was given exclusive authority as president of the Indian National Congress, the largest and most prominent Indian public organization, which became the central and defining influence of the Indian independence movement. In 1929, Gandhi planned to launch a Satyagraha against the tax on salt. Gandhi orchestrated a 229-mile trip, 24-day hike. The purpose of the march was to protest against the British Salt Acts. Gandhi informed his long-suffering nation, salt was the greatest necessity of life, the only condiment of the poor. By taxing the state can reach the starving millions. On April 6, millions of protesters and Gandhi reached Dandi Beach, and they stole handfuls of sea salt along the shore, thus producing their own salt and breaking the law. Before year's end, every jail cell in India was filled with more than 60,000 protesters. Afraid of public scrutiny, the British consequently were forced to liberate the protesters, including Gandhi. In response to the act of civil disobedience, Gandhi and several congressional leaders were invited to London in 1931 to discuss India's future. The Muslims and untouchables rejected Gandhi to represent them and demanded their own separate electorates. Thus, Gandhi returned to India and retired from politics. Gandhi was imprisoned once more as the government tried to insulate him by preventing him from influencing the public. On September 1932, while still a prisoner, Gandhi embarked on another fast in order to persuade the British government to give the untouchables their own political representation in the new Indian constitution. The fast produced an emotional upheaval, and the leaders of the Hindu community jointly and speedily devised an alternative electoral arrangement. The fast became the starting point of a vigorous campaign for the removal of the disabilities of the untouchables, whom Gandhi referred to as Harijans or children of God. In the following years, Gandhi continued leading the battle for independence until finally, on August 15, 1947, India gained freedom. Tragically, a few months later, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu fanatic on January 30, 1948. Gandhi's methods and legacy have influenced many Indians and others worldwide. His actions have become a symbol of strength and struggles for human rights for all races and ethnicities.
Beings are searching for meaning, and the lives of the likes of Gandhi provided to us in ways that we like, in ways that speaks to us as human beings, so that we can, as some people say, reclaim our humanity, which sometimes we lose.
His legacy and influential teachings live in many civil rights leaders such as Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez, and many more. Gandhi's life will forever be a legend of motivation, encouragement, and inspiration.